I would like to discuss, I don't have it in front of me, I know that they're attempting to put it up on the screen. Thank you very much. Oh, there it is. I've got it. Looking at number, I would call it 1, looking at producing a report to the board within 90 days outlining a range of specific options for accelerating emissions reductions related to operations in line with latest climate science. I am certain that our staff could put something together, maybe not as soon as 90 days, but if I could propose maybe bringing something back by June of this year.
120 days?
Yes. Okay. With
Sorry, did you want to do that as a motion, or?
We will, well, let's finish it off.
Oh, the whole
Yep.
thing, oh, okay.
With regard to number 2, I would suggest perhaps the same thing. As you recall, in our strategic plan, we have a priority around environment. And so currently, this is something that certainly is in line with the work that we are doing. And so I think, again, 120 days, bring something back to the board in June could be certainly relevant. With regard to number 3, I think that right now there's a lot of work that we're doing around our strategic plan and attempting to put it together and operationalize it. I think it's a bit of a lofty request at this point with regard to looking at consulting widely across the community, but also with other districts. So I think that when you put that together widely within our own community is one thing, but with other districts is another. So I think that I'd like to suggest that it might be something we could put aside for the moment, or for at least this year.
I just wanted to offer that I agree, big news, but I think that would make more sense after we had some of the other initial data to come in before we decide how far we need to go in terms of further research.
And then with regard to number 4, I think that is some of the board's work with regard to an initiative there. So I'll just leave that one.
Okay, and that can also be referred to the June meeting or the July meeting. Posted. Okay, so recommendation for the superintendent is to change 1 from 90 to 120 days, 2 from 90 days to 120 days. Can we have a motion to recommend that to the board? Trustee Croft, Trustee Horn, any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Can we refer items 3 and 4 to July?
Don't have a meeting in June.
Really? Okay, Trustee.
September,
There's none in August?
unless they're specially
How
called.
about email? I thought I missed the meeting. What do you mean?
We've always had some, but that they're
Oh,
specially
that's right,
called.
there's special meetings. We have these special meetings.
Right.
Okay, so we're gonna move to 3 and 4. Recommend to the board that they may be referred to the board meeting in September. Moved by Trustee Spilsbury, second by Trustee Kemmler. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to education. We have Ian tonight. We're going to Nicole Maltova. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you. Welcome.
It's not just you, it always happens.
What's that? Just getting it going. Here you go.
Close enough.
Okay. Here you go. Close enough. Well, thank you for your time. My name's Ian Zivit. Thank you for the introduction. I brought Sandra Buckland here with me as well. She's the Vice Principal at Comat-Margot. And you get the luxury for the next 5 minutes to listen about what a Comat-Margot is all about and a little bit about our school plan. Because of the size, it might be difficult to read. But with regards to our school plan, we have an inquiry-based question related to student achievement, and will the focus of instruction on oral language, outcomes in French language curriculum improve student achievement in reading and writing? For us, the obvious answer is yes, but for everyone else the question is, how does that happen? So, two-part to our school goal. The second piece is that a huge buy-in from our staff around the educated citizen.
Ian,
So
can I
look-
just interrupt? Is there a
Yeah.
way to put this on full screen? You've
I
got
was
it on,
hoping that, but I don't have a visual on that, so go for it. Yeah, just go to Steve. Thank you.
The average age of the trustee is much older than the average age of the
Hey,
principal.
I was
so-
hoping that I was gonna have full screen. Can I ask Glenn, please make this work, and that's what I see here. And every TV is different.
Isn't technology wonderful? Sometimes.
Usually you just have to
Yes,
click on that.
sometimes.
And it's always great when she's back going.
Hold on a second.
It's reversed.
Yay.
Some image. You're a hockey fan?
Jeez. Our guests have to be careful what they have in their backgrounds, eh?
It's all legitimate. I'm a huge hockey fan and a traditionalist, so I adore original 16s, specifically the Detroit Red Wings with their rich history.
What year was that?
That was in the 50s, so the goalie was, it looked like, it wasn't Terry Sasha, but I don't know, it'd be in the 50s. Come? Yeah, good eye. I think this is all we can do.
Oh,
There.
Just there, okay, wait for it.
That's what we
And he
originally did.
confidently knows it's going to do it.
You did something, Glenn, when you
It was like you moved your arm. This position.
just clicked the slide. There.
There we go!
Oh, let's go again.
It's not just, you tell me when you want to proceed, or
We're having fun.
are you? I don't know if the link.
I'm getting dizzy.
Yeah.
Let's not look at this.
I don't know if Glenn's having fun.
Great job.
Let's see.
We're very engaged. Everybody's like, whoa,
Lots of money from the peanut gallery.
We're all holding our breath.
whoa. It's flying backwards. I don't know why.
Oh, yeah, you're not going to be able to do any of this.
I'll just read aloud for Rob.
Okay. Thank you.
What about the top that says swap displays?
Closed caption, right there.
When you're in this slide.
Not
It
there,
doesn't put the slide
presentation.
presentation up and down.
It's a setting in presentation.
Use slideshow.
Awesome. That's not sure.
You can only see it. There. Yes, okay.
Hey!
There it is. Setting in PowerPoint.
Okay, I'm gonna go back. Let's start. So, inquiry question based on oral language. So, will the use of the competency and use of oral language based on curriculum set up by French immersion standards for outcomes, will you see an improvement in achieving reading and writing? The answer is yes. I'm going to tell you how we do that. Before I do, another piece that we have a huge significant staff buy-in is around creating flexible, self-motivated students who have positive self-image and capable of making independent decisions. So that's a two-pronged approach to our school plan. Staff felt that this was really important, and we've done a number of things to incorporate this, and that's why I'm here to talk about it. So what makes Mount Provo or École Mount Provo unique? Our population is approximately 450 students who are enrolled in French immersion. That makes up of 19 divisions from kindergarten all the way to grade 7. As you know, each year we have a wait list of kindergarten students whose families wish to enroll in our program. We have 31 students who are self-identified as Indigenous learners. Our demographic consists of all children who reside within the central zone of the Cowichan and Yukon Valley. So contrary to what people may believe, our population is quite diverse. We are a very inclusive community who have children with special needs that access our French immersion program and who are very successful. And we pride ourselves on tradition that stems from French Canadian culture and a rich history across our wonderful nation. So our success is a formula that we incorporate relevant teaching practice that has a strong focus on student engagement And we maintain standing traditions that exist within the school that have always existed around fine arts, academics, and athletics. How do we operate to accomplish our goals? Well, I think it comes down to the people within our building, and it's a community approach, but it's basically comes down to programming. We're able to offer our children a lot of choice within our school, and that comes from our dedicated teachers and adults who work in the building, who provide a lot of extracurriculars for our kids. And a lot of it comes from student agency, so providing students with a voice in what it is exactly that they want as far as extras that go beyond the classroom. Our focus is our focus on our passions. We love to spread joy, be kind, and express empathy on a daily basis. We have strong partnerships and networks with people within our building and outside of our building. We teach kids to do the right thing. We have a program we call the Bonnes Actions Spontanées, so it's like random acts of kindness. And Bonnes Actions Spontanées, we catch kids doing good things. Teachers find kids doing good things. They write up a slip. We do it on the morning announcements daily, and we announce the Bonnes Actions Spontanées. And then we do a draw every month, and the students either have it's an incentive, a prize, we get to have lunch purchased by the principal or vice principal. We're a very proud community. We monitor our growth as public education. We function as a grassroots group. We look at all the stakeholders who are involved, including our parents and our learners, and of course our teachers. We love to make the learning as meaningful as possible, and we love to celebrate. And we celebrate, and we also provide opportunity to do the right thing, and a lot of right brain research as far as executive functioning and learning a second language is basically the acquisition. Most importantly, we take risks, and we're very brave. This is a picture of a young student in grade 7 at the year-end, one of the year-end field trips. They go to Strathcona, and this tree, and they're climbing approximately, if not more than 100 feet from the base, and we take risks. We're a very collaborative group at our school as well. We work together for the common goal, or common good. What takes place at our school? Why and how does this happen? Well, it starts with a dedicated group of leaders. Myself and Sandy are very passionate with the job that we do. We care a lot about our staff and our students and our community. We have a strong learning team who has invested interests of the kids, dedicated teachers, of course, with strong French language acquisition, both reading, writing, and oral speaking, and we come from it from a collaborative approach. The learning environments are what's important, so we tailor our learning environments to meet the specific needs of our children. That's one of our focuses. There's a wide range of options for children with various needs at our school. We blend the outdoor education with hands-on opportunity. We structure the classroom and the learning environment in such a way to invoke small group instruction and even one-on-one instruction. So there's an opportunity for teachers to check in with kids on a daily basis. Thanks, man. Sorry about that. I'll get you back the next time. It's all good. We also consider the fact that learning can be rigorous, so we also look at opportunities for kids to have movement and breathing breaks. We have unique learning spaces that invoke collaboration, and we learn alongside the students. And we make learning social and fun. How do we do that? Well, before I go into that slide, I will show you some ways we make learning fun. We invite community partners, so when we have Drop Everything and Read, we have French-Canadian hockey players that play on the Capitals team, and they come to our school and they read in French to kids. We have fun by making fun of ourselves and providing incentives. So this was a Jump Rope for Heart event. If the school raised over, I think it was $3,000, they had the opportunity to pie me and Madam Buckland in the face. If you can see the total behind my head, it's $5,800 and some change. And I'm getting pied by one of the top earners for the Jump Rope for Heart. And I didn't include your picture, Sandy, I apologize, but she also got pied. She was fully ready for it with a headgear and a cape and everything. We look at personal awareness and growth and self-identity. So this was a cork doll project, and we're really fortunate to have a really great learning commons or library space, which allows the opportunity for kids to explore. So looking at that ADHD curriculum. So this is a cork doll project. So every division is represented in this image, all 19, except we did take off the top one, which was the 19th. But every child made their own personalized cork doll to identify who they were and how they saw themselves within our school and also within their class. You might think that that's easy, but I was forced to make my own cork doll, and I struggled through it, and I always wanted assistance, so perseverance and grit and determination are a little bit part of this project as well. Our kids are involved with programming and coding, so this is a Lego robotics group, and they meet weekly. That's a Lego map, and so there's different activities that they have to do within a community here, and so they have to move the robot throughout that space, and they program them what to do so. Kids work together. These are garden boxes that we bought these 12 by 2 inch pieces of wood, and I helped a group of boys that it's sort of a group that we have as boys to be boys kind of group. It's like a young gentleman's group, a group of students that were struggling with developing and building empathy. So we had an opportunity to work with that group, and they had to work with some younger kids along with doing their guidance. But they did all that building themselves. They moved the garden boxes themselves, and you can see that they reaped the benefits and how happy they were in installing that. Just a proud, inspired group of kids. We're a loving, caring, empathetic community, as you can see here with these lovely children in the picture. This is where we pride ourselves on the oral language piece. Every year we have an oral speech competition. It's called Concours d'Oratoire. It's something that I did as a kid when I was in French immersion. I still have my 1989 button. And each kid writes a constructive speech on a topic that they find the most interest, and they do a presentation. We team up with a co-Cobble Hill, and we have a local or district competition. And those kids that are successful at the grade 5, 6, and 7 level, but the 6s and 7s, they represent themselves at the provincial level. And we've always been very successful, both locally, but also at the provincial level too. These are siblings playing chess. We have a chess club, and you can see that siblings could be amicable and get along. Art and fine arts are a huge piece of our school culture and fabric. So if you tour our hallways, and I think if you walk into any school, you get that immediate feeling of what kind of school this is. It sort of touches you. You'll see a lot of art displayed around our school. This is kind of a representation of what we had the last month in January, as far as the amount of rain that you probably saw, and the flooding, and just some other cool pieces I thought I'd share with you. Annually, or twice a year now, we have a concert at the community center, the Performing Arts Center. So these are our kids on stage, and what an opportunity, and how proud we are to celebrate them. And then we have a band program as well. And, oh no, why is it paused? It got stuck. It doesn't matter, there's 4 more slides left, and they were just slides showing images of our kids. Get my fingers down. Goes right up, huh? Yeah. Here. I just want to leave you with 2 things, because I don't want to take up much more of your time. I'm trying to escape. It really hurts now. You can just get me out of there. There's only 2 pieces I want to share with you. Is I think that's important to us is our community partnerships. You're probably well aware that Nurse Cowichan occupies a space within our building. But our kids have the opportunity to work with Nurse Cowichan and to find out exactly what it is that they do and how to give back to the community. We have a rock climbing gym in our facility as well, and we partner up with the Cowichan secondary team to utilize that space as much as we possibly can. Our kids go out into the community. We have a daycare program within our school as well, so we link kids that are coming into the daycare program or early learning program to link to our school. But a few things that I thought I would leave you with is just considering the importance of French immersion, that it continually generates a huge interest within our community. That is still there. There was once upon a time there was a French task force to think about how we can continually grow that program and improve upon that program. So it's something for food for thought, and we would like to sort of rehash that conversation on what we can do to sustain the growth of that program. Some of the challenges we're going to run into in the near future are finding qualified French-speaking teachers. So that is going to be a significant challenge for us. Our population is still going to grow, but we're not going to grow anymore in size. Consider the fact that we don't have a late immersion program in the Cowichan Valley, and I thought that might be a really cool and neat opportunity to have a late immersion program. Then you might have your first dual track school within the Cowichan Valley. Right now, both of our French immersion schools are single track schools. And just to not forget about us. I think sometimes everyone thinks that everything's fine and dandy over in the French immersion stream and things, but we would love to see your faces and come visit us, and then any opportunity that we have to have you in our building, we'd be more than happy to welcome you. So I did have a few more slides, but we'll just end it there, and I'll take an opportunity for any comments, questions, or observations from the table. Thank you for your time.
2 questions, Ian. The Nourish Cowichan, you said your students help with that program?
Mm-hmm.
How does that look?
Yeah, so it started when we had, at the beginning of the year, our cross-country runners were doing laps around the school, and Fatima was cooking and making of waffles. So the kids are like, they just want to stop running, and they want to know where is that delicious smell coming from. So at times, when we first started with this conception, well, let's bring the cross-country team in, and she fed them all waffles, but she also did a little briefing on them, and what exactly is Nourish Cowichan about? What do we do? To the kids' surprise, they didn't realize that there were that many children within our community that go unnourished. So questions about what can we do to help it raise funds for Nourish Cowichan to continue the growth and the strength of the program. So kids take up on fundraising initiatives upon themselves. Even with young entrepreneurs, some of the funds that kids raise, they just donate to Nourish Cowichan. Just out of the goodness of their heart, knowing the significance and the importance of the program for our community.
My other question, the cork dolls?
Yeah.
Is that done annually?
No, we switch. So we have an annual art project every year. So last year was the cork dolls. The year prior to that, we did a clay representation. If you walk into the entrance of the Comat Provo, just off to the right-hand side, there are clay squares that are all put together, and it's all an ecosystem that we would see within our Cowichan Valley. So rivers, mountains, fish, laying eggs, just a general ecosystem of the Cowichan Valley. So this year what we intend on doing is what you see in most schools, and we have to talk to Larry, but Larry switched jobs, so he's busy. Most schools have the salmon program, and they have the salmon on the outside of their fences. Well, we thought we would do something different, and it would be like a grounds beautification piece. We would take circular pieces of wood, and each child, and we had this dot day project that's sort of representation of who they were. So each child would create their own, and they would be at various lengths along a fence line along Salmonos Road. And that would just give the symbolism of that flowers are growing year round. And it's a very colorful, bright school. Each child has a representation of a bit of a lasting mark on the school. So every year we do a school-wide art project.
Trustee Thorne?
Yeah, can you kind of elaborate a little bit on, you mentioned special needs.
Yeah. So students with designations. So we have 8 students that are on the autism spectrum, and we have students that are designated with learning disabilities, and they're fully participating within our programs and accessing the curriculum and the language successfully, but not without supports, right? So we have those supports in place to do so. That's, for us, that's educational assistant time and teachers building capacity to work with students with special needs.
Trustee Spilsbury?
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ian. Your school and students and staff really came to life for me, so
Thanks.
it was really good. I really liked your inquiry question.
Okay.
I'm wondering what's your evaluation
Yeah.
and when is your end line?
Didn't think you wanted to hear about data today, because data just bores the heck out of people, but we do
That
access.
would be me,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. Well, we access the data as far as report card data, and then we also look at our DART data. So that's the district reading and writing assessments, and then we also take samples from students. So teachers do group marks, and we look at the sampling of the student work, and yeah, we track that work. We do see some deficiencies at certain grade levels, and we've identified those. So particularly right now, our grade 3s are struggling learners as far as ability to access the curriculum and with the reading and writing, both French and English. So we have specific interventions in part of our learning team to help target those supports for those kids.
And when will you finish the study?
Well, for us, it's ongoing because other than adding pieces with regards to the educated citizen, it's ongoing because that's our meal ticket. We're here to learn French and to speak French, so we have to continually monitor that, and we have to look at our practices within the classroom because things are obviously shifting and changing quite considerably as far as how kids access information nowadays. So we have to keep our teachers actually, so more it's an evaluation of how our teachers are doing and keep them current and up to date so that the students continue engaged. Because it can be, as you probably know if you've ever had to learn a second language, it can be very tough and difficult and sometimes dry, right? So you have to make it fun and enjoyable and engaging. So it's twofold. Not only do we look at the teachers and the content and how they're delivering information to the students and how the students are accessing language and tracking those students as well. And then we try to maintain so that there's the attrition of our students, that they continue on in the program. So our goal obviously is that they would continue on and graduate grade 12. That's not necessarily always a reality. So our focus for us is we're K to 7 right now, but we also make sure that that transition into grade 8 is a successful and smooth one. Yeah. Anna, so you do the, I don't do
I just thought, thank you, it's, I pop in occasionally.
She's a
to
grandma at the
schools.
school.
I'm a grandma at the school. And it just always, walking in, you're so right, it's very welcoming. I would invite you all just to pop in. It's welcoming, the band, you can hear it coming from upstairs, and happy little feet all over, and children, very, very busy
Yeah.
building. Like it's never
Very
dull
active.
through your
Yeah.
hallways.
And sometimes, you know, I think as people walk into a building, we worry about noise, but we have to think about what is the noise. It's constructive, it's positive, it's happy. Thanks, it's working. I can show you a couple more slides. I also forgot at the Christmas time, we, as a community, we request food items and we build hampers personally. And I get the privilege of delivering those hampers and often on average 7 to 8 families a year. And just to see the warmth and the joy that brings those families as well. I just want to show you, this is our staff. So we do a lot of team building activities as far as growth within our staff. So this is our staff, determined, curling. They're taking a curling lesson. Their heads aren't up looking at the picture. They're determined. They're sweeping at nothing. There's no rock there. They're motivated.
We were practicing.
You're practicing. So practice makes perfect. A lot of building, a lot of hands-on. This was last 2 Fridays ago. We did a joint Pro D with the Co-Cobble Hill, and it's a program called Play is the Way. And we're looking at, and play is not the focus. We're looking at providing an environment where students can have some pressures that we can push them to their capacity, but teach them self-soothing or self-regulatory mechanisms so that they can handle those events independently. Hence our second goal on being independent as the education system. That was it. That was my last slide.
Ian, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Now on to budget.
Yeah. We have a fair bit of financial information today, and I'm going to get up to the TV when we get the next document up. It's just easier to go through it up there.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to start with the 2019-2020 year-end projection. We may zoom it, that would be helpful. So this was prepared with data as of January 31st, which is really halfway through our school year. But trends are starting to emerge. So the first thing I wanted to show you was when we passed our budget, we had yet to receive the funding for the support staff wage increases. So remember, we had to go into the surplus because we knew that that grant would be coming in, but we couldn't budget for it because it hadn't been announced, but now it's in. And it's in the amount of $366,000. So we're showing now that revenue coming back into our projection. Now our expenses are in excess of $400,000 when we add in benefits. So they don't actually look at actuals, what it actually is costing the district. They do it on a formula basis, and so that might tell us kind of the percentage of our support staff to teachers as a percentage. The other area of note is we've lost a couple of short-term programs in the international program due to the coronavirus, just simply students not able to arrive. There were some significant dollars that were coming in this spring that we've now taken out of the projection, so that's going to impact our revenues and drop those down for this year. And also on the interest revenue, I think we're going to be about $130,000 over budget. Now we have some significant cash bank, in particular in relation to, we got $6 million for childcare spaces that we haven't spent yet, but that's all generating interest as we wait to pay those bills for those modulars. So that sort of nets us in a position on the revenue side of being about $150,000 over our budget and projection. Pretty small amount on 88 million, but relatively close. So we could go to the expenditures. Looking at the wages, I got a couple of, one really big highlight in here. So the first one, I'll just kind of quickly go down. We're projecting being $7,600 over on $5.6 million of principals. That's really close. 58,000 on 35 million of teachers. Again, super close. But the area of really big concern is in our casual replacements for illness and vacation. The trend is not really turning around. We talked to you earlier in the year about how the long terms were really high, but it's not just long terms. Long terms has sort of settled back out again. If the trend continues for the balance of the year, we're halfway through the year, projecting that will be $600,000 over budget on absenteeism and replacement costs. So it's a really bad year. It's a blip from our other years. It can show you that right now we're at 1.821 million halfway through the year. We don't just double that in our projection. We look at what that percentage is to this point compared to last year. Now what we have last year that we don't have this year is we had 4 snow days in February, which really reduced our absenteeism, and that's in the data set to which I'm comparing. So this could even go a little bit worse. If things continue exactly the same from February to June as it did last year, we're still gonna be about 300,000 over because we've just spent so much in the early months on absenteeism. Big highlight. Luckily, we're under budget on a few of the other areas, so I'm showing sort of netting out at about $78,000 overspent on wages. Not bringing in anything on in-service or extracurricular. Clearly, we haven't spent very much here, $235,000 on a $1 million budget. A lot of that is targeted. There's a big inquiry project in the 131 Indigenous Education budget that will remain in that fund. If unspent, there's also some PC Ed plan monies, but we may get some funding out of that coming into the end of the budget. You'll see an over and an under, and that's just with the employee health tax. Our budget program didn't have a proper place to put it, so we budgeted for it down here in health benefits, and it actually turned out to be a stat benefit. It all nets out in the end. It's just an accounting issue with the budget program that's fixed for next year. So overall on benefits, we think we're going to be about 317,000 to the good this year. So that's a positive. That's going to help us. And then just scroll to the bottom. We'll get to the bottom total. So when we net all of that, that 150 up on the revenues with the 238 on expenditures, I'm projecting a surplus on the budget right now of 388,000. We have 816 in the bank, so that puts us close to 1.2 million at the end of the year. Any questions on that? Of course, we'll get better if the projections are close to the end of the year, but we really need to watch that absenteeism budget and be thinking about what we do next year in budgeting.
Are you happy, Jason?
Well, no. To be honest, we don't typically have a budget that's $600,000 off, and the impacts of that will be significantly felt next year. I mean, we're spending money on replacing individuals for absenteeism purposes that could be spent on individuals, like regular individuals. So, I mean, this is a fixed budget. It's a closed circle. You spend more in one area, you have to spend less in another, and I worry about the impacts of that on maintaining staffing levels next year.
Trustee Spilsbury and then Trustee Cumberland.
Just wondering, is this then the total surplus that we have, or do we have any in the bank?
Yeah, so the 388 we would add to the 815 that's in the bank,
Oh, okay.
and that would get to about 1.2 million
Okay.
that I'm projecting the board will see at the year end, assuming something doesn't turn around on the sick leave or some of those short-term programs don't make it here.
I just follow. And so the 1.2 million is really the 1% that we are supposed to have?
It's a little bit more than 1%. It's probably 1.5% on an $80 million operating budget.
So we have little.
We have little to contribute into next year.
Oh, okay.
And I have a report where I'll get into that in the
Okay.
next balance of the agenda.
Thank you.
Trustee Cumberland.
The wellness program and absenteeism program that's starting, how long do you think you'll notice before or see if it's going to start having an effect?
Hard to know. I mean, certainly, we didn't have an H1N1 this year, or some obvious reason why our absenteeism is so high, or what was the other one the year before, H2N3, something like that. We didn't have that this year. What we just have is this really high pattern in the early part of the year of long-term leaves. So those are ones where somebody has a really significant illness. We had twice the teachers off that we would normally have off, and we can't predict that. I mean, and that's not one where somebody's calling in sick on a day-to-day basis. They're off for a surgery or some significant illness. But we were running close to 10 individuals, and that runs 10 for a full year. If that was to continue, it would be over $1 million at 100,000 a teacher. When we budget 450, our normal pattern is to have about 4 individuals off at any time on a significant long term. So that wouldn't be impacted likely by the wellness program. And where we're seeing most of the big variances, teachers are up overall by 13%. Most of that I think is tied to the long-term maternity. But EAs and clerical and custodians are up a fair bit. Like not 13%, we're up into the 30% range over the prior year, and that's the big sort of one that stands out to us. Why is that group off so much? Okay.
Moving on to new funding model.
So calling this the soft launch into the new funding model. This is just the letter that was received by board chairs, superintendents, and secretary treasurers, which states that the ministry are implementing 12 of the 22 recommendations on the new funding formula. And most of those are really related to policy and accountability measures. What is significant will be a new supplement for vulnerable students, which includes children in care or low-income households, and we're yet to see what those dollars look like for our district, but I think we can expect that compared to most of the province, we're probably going to be favored in that supplement. We do have a number of children in care, and certainly know that our data would probably support that. Now, there's also additional strengthening of the targeted funding policies for Indigenous students, so we know there's going to be some more, I guess, restrictions on how you spend the 131 or the targeted dollars. And there's also been talk of policy work around some of the accounting or surpluses that school districts can have. So we certainly have heard that some districts have upwards of 15 to 20% of their operating budgets in surplus, and the province wants to set some policy around that. And I think they're looking to target districts to be roughly where we are in our policy, 1 to 3%, but suggesting that 1% is not necessarily ideal, as it's a pretty small contingency. So most of the items are deferred. The maybe more significant ones, like the prevalence model, which everybody was talking about, the head count to instead of FTE model has been deferred. So certainly they're doing more study groups around how that affects careers and distributed learning, and that's to be seen. So we do have a new formula, or a relatively modestly adjusted formula, and we'll wait to see how that supplement affects our district.
Trustee Spilster.
Can I just ask, is the new funding around vulnerability, including student care, is that new money or is that shifted money?
I couldn't figure it out from the provincial budget announcement. When I saw the reconciliation of the monies coming into education, I didn't specifically see it, but it doesn't mean that it might not be part of some other ministries. Is it a children in care supplement that's somehow coming in? So I'm really unclear. It didn't appear obvious to me that the Ministry of Education had put a separate line item in. They were dictating what they had added to the block, and it was for wage increases and population growth, but I didn't see a line for that target. So I'm unclear whether it just gets repurposed out of the block, which is what happened last year with the increases to the 131s, the Indigenous Education Supplement and the Special Education Supplement. They just took it from elsewhere. Yet to be seen.
Any other questions of Mrs. Hankless? Okay, moving on to enrollment estimates.
Karen's going to join me, as this is Karen's work. Certainly hard to see up there. Karen, if you want to talk about the processes you've gone through and the FTE increase,
Sure.
etc.
So for February 14th, we're required to submit this form which projects where we think our enrollment will be for the next 3 years. So you can see, Jason, I need you a little pointer.
You can have it.
That's okay, I got a pencil. So you can see we're projecting 18.5 FTE more for September 2020. And that doesn't seem like a lot. Keep in mind, accountants are conservative and we wouldn't want to overestimate. We're trying to be conservative. But Jason just asked me to speak to how I came up with those numbers. So you probably are aware that we had our kindergarten enrollment, and Cheryl sends out a memo saying, please help us guess what your students will be, or estimate what your students will be for September. So we had kindergarten enrollments, but we also factor in what students are sitting in seats right now, and we use the principal's knowledge and Cheryl's knowledge of what's happening on the ground. We also look at birth rates from 5 years ago, and Beauregard, which uses a little bit of local knowledge and population changes that are around, and we just kind of go, oh, let's pick this. But for the grade 1, 2, 3, we take current Ks, we roll them forward, we roll the 1s to 2. So that's pretty easy for elementary. Where it gets a little complicated is for secondary. When we start to look at what's the head count to FTE ratio, which Jason was talking about that, about is that going to disappear? No, not for next year. So we start looking at what the history of ratios is, what the history of transition is when students move from grade 7 into 8, from grade 9 into 10, what's our usual change in that. And then we start to receive some students from other systems, from the private school system. So what's that traditionally been? So a lot of assumptions, and I do this lovely multicolored document that helps me kind of roll it all forward, and there's 3 of them because there's 3 years worth where I roll forward, and that helps with the bubbles, right? When we see in Jason's document later, you'll see that we've got a bubble in certain years, and then all of a sudden you'll see the next year, right, that bubble goes forward. So that helps us work through those bubbles, and that's where I get my FTE. But you can also see on here, there's other projections. There's continuing education, there's alternate schools, there's distributed learning, there's special needs, students with special needs here. So for those more fine numbers, I work with the departments on that, and I do the same roll forward game of kindergartens to 1, 1 to 2, and go right down into student details sometimes. Oh, okay, that student's a level 3 student, but they're in grade 12, but then I find out from the department head, oh no, that student's coming back for another year. So a lot of local knowledge from the departments as well. Indigenous education, again, I do the game of kindergartens to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and try and guess where our numbers will be. So using that as an example, we currently have 1605, and we're projecting 1567, which seems a bit low, but there's a bit of a bubble there that's going
There's
on.
134 grade 12s
Geez, I remember
identifying
some of this
for our
stuff.
program and 90-ish coming in. So that's why that number is dropping. And 90 is relatively constant through the majority of the cohorts, but there's a bump in grade 12 that's graduating and leaving the system, which is going to drop that number.
It's pretty interesting actually, but you can also get lost in all of the detail. Jason's great at remembering that kind of detail. So we do all of that for September for school age students, but if you look closely in your package, you'll see there's also adult education students in there too, which is a real challenge to try and guess. So those are non-graduated adults, so students can come back if they're an adult, but they haven't graduated yet, and we receive some funding. So you can see, actually, I just used the same number as what we have now, which I was advised by the principals of that department is as good a way of doing it as any. And then same with continuing ed, I project for February and for May as well. And you can see the numbers have unchanged, only because the principals of that program say current is just as good as what we might have for next year. And we wouldn't want to guess too high and then not receive the students. And we wouldn't want to project too low because then we wouldn't be in place and ready to go in September. So we're projecting September, February, May, school age and adults, and lots of different categories. So it's quite interesting, and they're rolling it out to 3 years. So just quickly on the 3 years, so for next September 2021, I'm projecting a 50.35 student increase. In September 2022, projecting a 36.7 student increase. So very small projections. It can all change with a group of families moving in or a group of families moving out. So
Karen, why
it's a
is
good
there
guess.
such a difference between yours and the district, the ministry? So there's like a 45 spread with the ministry. And
Well, a really good example of that actually is in the special needs. Where was that one using? Here
Well,
it
the
is. up here.
indigenous one is very large.
Yes, yeah, so they're just
Yeah.
taking what we have and rolling it forward. But the special needs is a really almost
Yeah,
comical
you'll see
one
it there.
because, where was
Look
that
at
one?
level 2.
Level 2,
150.
I'm projecting 150. We currently have 152. They're just rolling it forward and they're coming up with 312,
They're looking at-
429 for the following year.
They're looking at a rolling average of the last 3 years of growth, which is slowed down. So you know how we caught up on all of our designations all kind of at once? So when they look at that over the last 3 years ago, here's the average, they supply it mathematically, not looking to know that, well, yeah, we caught up, but we're not continuing to go at that rate.
So we have a lot of local knowledge that we say, no, that's not right. You know, here's the real numbers. So, you know, we use that. They often, oh, and the other thing at the very bottom is they ask us, what do we attribute our increase to? And I think it's on your second page on your document. And those are just me kind of saying, oh, a third, to provincial immigration, international immigration, migration to or from independent schools. I don't really know. I mean, we're just trying to estimate what we think it will be. And then just other. So that's the other thing. But they often lately have come back again in May and asked us, are you sure your numbers are right? Do you have any more information? So we get another chance to communicate with them if we think our numbers were not correct. they've been pretty accurate, using the combination of factors.
So Karen, why do they go through the exercise when you're right?
I ask myself that all the time. No, I don't know. No, they go through the exercise with every school district because we have local knowledge and they need to ask us. And that's just a mathematical formula.
No, I can understand them asking you, but why would they go through their own projections when they're wrong? Because they don't have the local knowledge.
Some school districts just sign off on these.
But this is what we're building our budget on. That's when I ask people, can you help me out? Like Cheryl and I worked really closely on the kindergarten numbers. And we worked with the schools and, you know, the birth rates. This is really important because that's what we're building our budget on.
So that 18 FTE is 46 down in elementary and 64 up in secondary. And now secondary would include the grade 7s at Chemainus in that number. So that's important for us because we start to look at our staffing right now, and we've already taken Karen's projection sheets. We've taken the February special education enrollment data and rolled it forward into next year. We've then taken the reclassification of the G's and Q's and rolled that forward into next year. And we've built the classrooms already, roughly, based on the collective agreement restored and the collective agreement pre-restoration to figure out the operating budget components. And there are some shifts here. I mean, certainly that drop in elementary, now, I'll get to it in my report a little bit because it actually has an impact on one of our schools in capacity, just those kids moving forward. For instance, what you don't see here in this number is that Quamachin's going from 541 students to 601 students. 547 to 601 in 1 year. I mean, that's just because the size of the grade 7 cohort coming in and the size of the grade 9 cohort going out. And so we need to know that now as we go into budgeting because, well, how do we house 2 additional teachers that may be required for that number of teachers? And so we need to know all of our elementary staffing because that's where all the portables are to see, well, is there one we can grab? And so it's all part of the planning, and it all starts with these enrollment projections because they go right into the funding announcement.
Which is what I wanted to say. I mean, I'm always showing people this one-page document is the total budget. This is our budget dollar value. But that directly feeds the FTE on here, which you don't have this one, but I have this pinned on my wall if anybody ever wants to see it. But it's also on the ministry website for every school district. And it directly feeds to here, which gives us a dollar value on the bottom, and that's how we build our budget.
That 8,162.973 FTE right up there on the top section.
Yeah.
That's what our ratios are based on. So that's the classroom enhancement fund ratio baseline. So when we're looking at LA at 1 to 504, it's off that number, or SPED at 1 to 364, it's off that number, etc.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, moving on to 7.4.
Yes.
Page 19 to 25.
I won't read it all, but there's parts of it that I do want to read and go over. We are building into next year's budget already, having adopted the current year's budget. And so I wanted to bring to the board's attention some of the things that we're starting to think about as we work into that process. If we could go to the slide, the ones with the graphs, we can go right there quickly. So this is the enrollment translated, and you can see that the K numbers coming in are a smaller cohort than most of the previous years. So that's interesting. And that's based on the birth rate dip locally and the enrollment data that we already have. You can see that there's a pretty big cohort at the grade 12 area. And that's based on a number of students being maintained at CVOLC as well as greater than 1.0 course load. But there's a significant variation from year to year. You can go from, for instance, the Ks this coming year to the 2s, 657 to 573. So they can vary, 80 students a cohort, and that has a huge impact on our enrollment. As we scroll that down, can kind of show you the multi-year enrollment. So starting in 2008, 2009 at the bottom. If you move to the left, it's just like drop. We got to 2014, 2015, and we bounced back almost as fast as we went down. And then it slowed down this year. So we were caught off guard in most of those other years. Our numbers didn't suggest that we would grow by those 200 students that we saw in some of those rebound years. A lot of that was in migration to our school district, and so that's kind of slowing down, and we've seen that slow down in the south zone and in the north zone where we had our significant pressures over the last couple of years. And unless that pattern changes, we don't project, the growth in the enrollment to kind of take off on us, which has its pros and cons. And pros, it makes our facilities a little bit easier to manage. But of course, we like to grow. It's also a benefit of getting larger and getting additional revenues.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry,
Thank you.
love these graphs.
So we're going to have two pretty big projects underway in the next 2 years, and that is the building of the high school and the building of the hospital. And as I understand, the hospital is going to be bigger, so we're looking at probably a fair number of people moving into the area for that. He says, yes, well, that'd be a pickle. So how do you...
Hope so.
Yeah. So are you trying to take that into account yet, or are you going to wait
We
until
haven't
you
factored
know
it in
more?
yet. I mean, that's a couple of years out for us, and I think even further for the hospital project, based on the planners meeting that we had. But yeah, it will. Hopefully that will bring in. I mean, now this will be a place where there's a lot of construction work for people for potentially a decade. Hopefully that does bring in families. But we only go out 3 years for the ministry. We can certainly think, further. And we have to do a 3-year financial plan as well. So we can move to the unique student needs slide. Now this impacts our classroom enhancement fund. It's just there it is. Thank you. And so you see when Karen was showing you how the ministry had calculated these huge numbers for us on special education designations, and they had looked at that where the line goes up and just kept that going. But it's not true. I mean, we caught up, and now we're kind of plateaued out here with roughly about 400-ish students that are in fundable designations. So it's about 1,000 students overall in designations, but about 400 in fundable. So we just wanted to show you how that kind of was in around the 200 range, and now it's up to 400, and that has a big budget impact because there's of course services associated, and you don't necessarily receive equal dollars out of the supplement as to what the services cost. Okay, hidden into expenditures, there's a number of things we're already aware of. On the funded side, the support staff have renewed collective agreements for the next 3 years, started this year, and those wage increases of 2% were bargained, and we'll have those for the next 2 years in our budget, and those are funded. Well, we saw in the previous number, not fully funded, but pretty close. We have not concluded teacher bargaining, so that's yet to be determined, but any costs associated with that should also come with funding. So not funded, I just mentioned that we've already identified a school that will likely require 2 portable classrooms for next year, and we think we have those spaces at some other schools, or some portables at some other schools, so we'll have to be thinking about those moving costs to relocate those facilities. Now that's a school that in the following year will also grow with another large cohort, so it's probably over the next 2 to 3 years an annual occurrence to have to move some capacity into Quamich from elsewhere. What's not on the list yet is because it came in after we'd written this report, was that our support staff benefits are up by $150,000 next year, and that's based on usage for extended, so that may tie in with our sick leaves up, also is our use of our medical plan. There's probably a link there. And that's not on this list, and that won't be funded. The principals, vice principals, and other employees not covered by a collective agreement may be entitled to compensation increases, and that's sort of based on what the teachers will receive, and we know the provincial framework is currently being bargained at 2%, so we would expect that there may be the potential to increase principals, vice principals by 2%, doesn't get funded. We have lots of new teachers moving through the band. If you start as a new teacher, you start at what's called level 0, and you go all the way to 10. So there's 11 steps of incremental income on your career path. Plus, you may get a master's along the way. And we hired a whole bunch of new teachers about 3 years ago as we restored the joint collective agreement language with the teachers. Well, they're all moving up the bands on an annual basis, and that's going to cost the district additional funding. That number usually comes out at about $300,000 or $400,000 over a year. I've highlighted here specifically the replacement costs for teachers and support staff are currently projecting at $600,000 above budget. That exceeds budgeted and expended levels in prior years. We need to be thinking about how we deal with that in the next year, or whether we see that as a one-time blip, or whether it's not. And we know our hydro rates are up a little bit. So under new considerations, that coronavirus is wreaking havoc on the international program. Certainly access to China and Korea markets at the moment. We know that it's difficult to get into those countries right now. We have the district principal of ISP with a retirement, and there's a succession plan that we'll be needing to consider in the budget. We also want to talk about the fact that we had a committee that reviewed clerical allocations, and we haven't done anything with those recommendations. They're also difficult to implement because in many cases they're 1 or 2 hours to a school, and how do you do that when you have a 4-hour minimum? The personnel growth and enrollment has resulted, that rebound has resulted in really significant pressure on a lot of the board office departments, particularly human resources, payroll, and accounting. So we'll have some sort of a proposal to address that capacity. I think during the budget process, we think it can be done sort of cost neutral to the operating budget, and we'll talk to you about that later on. We currently have 2 mechanics, but we have, this year we had to put about $60,000 of additional funding in for our bus maintenance, and that's simply because of some major repairs, and we're concerned that those repairs will continue to be major if we don't catch up on a lot of our work with those vehicles. And so we're just kind of dropping this here now as something that we'd like to talk about during budget, is the potential for additional mechanic supports. Also looking at, over the years, we've continued, we bring this up every year just to keep it on the radar, we've continued to move our trades into capital projects. We still have lots of capital projects, but just to kind of remember that one day we might not, and we have a lot of workers who may need to come back into the operating budget. We haven't adjusted our school supply allocations for any sort of inflation in a few years, something to remember. Board's always talking about early years education and what that might mean, as well as reconciliation. So just bringing these here as sort of things to be thinking about as we move into the next year's budget. Now there will be some savings. Our school calendar is set pretty much by the teachers' collective agreement, and next year it's shorter. It has a later start and an earlier end. And that means that that's a shorter school year for the purposes of those employees that work the school year. So like an education assistant or clerical, or particularly operating a bus for those days, that shrinks by about a week next year. And so there'll be savings in the budget related to that shorter year. We get it every now and then. The other one is this year we paid MSP premiums and the employer health tax up until January, both. And now we just pay the employer health tax. So that MSP premium, which was already at 50%, so it's about 25% of what it used to be, that drops off our budget. So we get a savings there that we'll be able to apply towards balancing the budget. We had a slight reduction in the municipal pension plan premium rate for the board this year. So that's coming down over the whole year, as well as WorkSafe. Finally making progress on that WorkSafe rate. So WorkSafe rates are going up per the sector, but we're not really going up with them because we're coming down on our demerits. So the board contracted SD23 a couple of years ago, Kelowna, who have a department of 10 that just manage WorkSafe claims on behalf of school districts, and they've more than paid for themselves and done really, really good work for the board in turning that around. On the revenue side, certainly, it'll all be clear on March 15th as far as the grant with the new formula, the supplement we just talked about for children in care and low-income households. It'll be based on the 18.5 FTE that we've gone up. On an ongoing basis, we're continuing to receive the transportation supplement as well as the pay equity. I put a tripartite agreement in the report because we need to get working on those plans, and when we do, they'll have a budget impact just on how the funding flows. But certainly, this year the board received about $88,000 for extracurricular activities through the tripartite agreement that we didn't have to do any work to get. It just came on a formula basis, but we need to get a plan on how to get that out to families. Surplus, we balanced on 1.769 million this year. We balanced on such a high number because we didn't have the funding in yet for the support staff wage increases, so otherwise it would have been about 1.5. So we've got a surplus remaining right now of 815 plus that 366, so about 1.2 million. So this is a very, very big item for consideration for next year, because we've spent at a higher level than our revenues coming in because we've had surplus available, because we've had some good February counts and May counts. And in my projection, I haven't brought in any February count enrollment numbers yet, and those were good counts. So our February, when I do the February projection and we have it and we're knowing what those revenues equal, I think our surplus will look better. But it's still not going to be what we were able to bring in last year. It won't be 1.5 million. And some use the term structural deficit when you spend more than what you have, but we had that money in the bank to spend and still within our contingency policy. But with the way that sick leave budget is looking this year, I'm not projecting that we'll see that same kind of number at the end of the year. So what's left is we have to approve the budget by June 30th, 2020. And it all starts with the grant on March 15th, and then we move right into BEBC on March 24th and start the review. We'll survey, we'll meet with the partners, we'll have a public meeting, and we'll hope to have first and second reading of the budget bylaw on June 2nd, and then we wait for the Classroom Enhancement Fund confirmation on the funding. That's pretty much it. I think that's all I wanted to show you is the things we're working on.
I just want to say thank you. It's really comprehensive, and I feel like I've really sort of got the heads up for what some of the expectations are for what we're going to have to do this year, so thank you very much.
It won't be as easy.
No,
Just
I'm getting that.
it won't be as easy.
Fair enough.
Mr. Sanquest, you used structural deficit. I understood structural deficit was when you were not necessarily spending more than you have. That's just deficit spending, but it's where you are spending in more than one area than you have budget for.
I think you could. I understand it as you spending more than you have overall. That you structurally have created an expenditure level that exceeds your revenue stream.
But it's your structure that's a problem.
Or it's built into the structure of, I think there's probably a couple different definitions of it. I've always viewed it as it's built into the structure of how you budget, that you're budgeting beyond what your revenues will support year over year.
Because we're tight.
However,
We're very tight.
you wouldn't want, if you're a district with 15% surplus, that means you haven't delivered your services to those kids of that year either. So you have to kind of balance those two views. The money that comes in is for the kids of this particular year, in theory. But you do need to have surplus in the bank for those unexpected, and 1%. As you know, when we carve off the zeros, is about $800, and that's a hot water tank or car brakes.
Thank you, sir. So we're on to page 26, I believe it is.
Yes.
Net budget guiding principle.
Yeah. I want to thank our Director of Communications for taking a crack at our budget guiding principles and aligning them nicely to the new strategic plan. So they are here for discussion because they would be, if agreeable, would be moved forward to the board for adoption at the next board meeting. But it is a revised over the previous year as it's brought in components that are in the strategic plan, such as create a budget that prepares learners for the future they will create.
Trustee Spilsbury.
Thank you for the development. They look great. I just had a sort of niggling thought when I read in bullet 2, the term must. And is that must coming from the ministry? So it's our will to do it that way. And I wonder if we could frame it in a way that it's our decision to do that, not that we're required in regulation to do that.
How about just
But for
changing
good-
must to will be developed?
Sure, yeah.
Good. Any other comments or questions about the guiding principles? So is there a motion to recommend this to the board for approval? Trustee Crown, trustee Thorne, any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Excellent report, as usual. Committees, highlights of the January 21st advisory committee meeting.
Oh, sorry, I get confused as to when I'm supposed to move acceptance or if I'm supposed to give the summary.
You can do what you want. I think it's just, because no, it's nothing that's approved here, it's just, if you have any more highlights, then it's already here. Or anything to add, and
I would like to add that it's always a pleasure to meet with our advisory committee. At our last advisory committee meeting, we broke our record for the most students in attendance with a total of 4. I tried to take credit for this, but I think it's really because our superintendent, Robin Gray, has been very solicitous in gathering student voice and encouraging their participation, so thank you very much for that. Another interesting highlight is our QP representative, Tara, and her team actually went around and visited each and every school to check in with her colleagues and with everything else, and it was it's always more enlightening when you go in person, and so she was nice enough to share that with us. We had our students at Kelsey had worked in a reconciliation theme to their celebration of kindness and culture and all those things, so they are bringing that into their daily lives at school, so that was very exciting. And we took a look at the budget, we took a look at the new Cowichan Secondary School, and there have been a number of meetings in terms of what to do with the public spaces there, and so we gathered some very helpful information. Jason informed us that we have just approved, the board, of course, I recently approved this year's budget, which gave him about 2 seconds of breathing time before turning around and starting on next year's budget. So just want to appreciate all that staff had to offer. Dennis introduced the Move Side campaign and asked people to participate. And it was a very collegiate and insightful meeting. So I would like to move that we accept the highlights. We receive the highlights of the January 21st Advisory Committee meeting and the highlights of the February 18th Advisory Committee meeting.
so I think you can save that for the board too.
I thought you had to accept it. No? Never mind.
No, just an opportunity to discuss the outcome of the meeting.
Okay, thanks.
But you can move adjournment.
Oh, I'd like to move that we adjourn. Seems I wasted some of your time.
Trustee Thorne, all